Welcome back to Vote 2024 with me, Camilla Tominey. Let's get into the latest on the betting scandal now. So we've got 5 more police officers now implicated in the Tory betting scandal. That comes after Craig Williams and Laura Saunders, both under investigation for allegedly betting on the election date, being disowned by the Tories. So just to explain, they're candidates and they're still on the ballot paper, but the Tories have basically disenfranchised them. Then, weirdly, another twist in this strange tale. A Labour candidate called Kevin Craig has been suspended for betting against himself winning his own constituency, which I find rather baffling. That's what we think has happened. We haven't had that confirmed, but that's what we think has happened. Well, let's bring former Labour MP Steve McCabe into the conversation. Stephen, it's strange this, isn't it? I mean, what's your reaction to what's been going on? We've got Tory candidates implicated. We've got Met police officers implicated now. We've got this separate thing of a Labour candidate betting. I mean, it's strange, isn't it?
Well, it is strange, but I think if you unpick it, it's fairly straightforward. In the case of the Labour candidate, as you say, betting against himself, Keir Starmer's been as good as his word. His feet haven't touched the ground. He's been suspended. That's the difference between leadership and dithering.
So you think Rishi Sunak dragged his feet too much?
Well, of course he did. And the longer he drags his feet, the more his scandal expands. And remember, the distinction here is one person who inexplicably bets against himself,
yes,
and clearly isn't fit to be a Labour candidate. No problem there. I'm very clear about that. But the other issue is whether people used insider knowledge to try and defraud the betting system.
Yes.
And that's a much more serious
Although it's
charge.
worth stressing, look, this is under investigation. The Conservative Party are investigating their own. We've got the Gambling Commission also investigating. So far, no admissions of guilt or indeed findings of guilt. We've heard from Rishi Sunak in a debate last week with BBC's Fiona Bruce saying how angry he is about all this. I mean, it's very difficult, isn't it?
Well, so angry that it took him nearly 2 weeks to take any action.
But then he thinks that the authorities should be investigating before he steps in.
If the Prime Minister isn't the authority, who is?
All right, Stephen, let's talk in general terms about the election campaign. I mean, what's your reading of it? Do you believe these projections of a Labour supermajority? One MRP poll last week for Savanta predicting that they may end up with 516 seats.
No, I don't think anyone in the Labour Party believes that at all. I think that is fantasy politics. I mean, it does look as if people go out and vote Labour in the way they are telling Labour candidates on the doorstep, then there could well be a Labour government. I don't think that's really in dispute. I can't think of anyone who can believe the Conservative campaign we've witnessed. And it's very clear they're much more interested in roughing each other up than fighting an election against the Labour Party.
Do we know what we're getting with Keir Starmer? I mean, we found out from Labour who they aren't going to tax. That phrase, working people, whatever that means, Stephen. But they haven't said who they are beyond non-DOMs, people who pay private school fees and energy companies. I mean, people are suspicious that as soon as he gets handed the keys to number 10, they've got to tax something because they can't afford all of their spending pledges if they don't. So are we to expect a wealth tax? Are we to expect an increase in capital gains tax? Could we see our gardens being taxed, as has been proposed by Labour in Wales? Council tax going up? Stephen, what do you reckon?
Well, I can't remember an election where the Labour Party hasn't been accused of having some fantasy range of taxes. And I can't actually remember a Labour government that's subsequently done it. Look, Labour has set out a programme that it believes it can implement within the tax provisions they've made available. And they've made it very clear the priority is to go for growth. It's to grow the economy.
But you must remember the 1970s, where the Labour government imposed a super tax on the wealthy, led to an absolute brain drain and an exodus. So this is why people are suspicious, because as Margaret Thatcher once famously said, you know, the trouble with socialists is that they're good at spending other people's money. So people are just thinking that Labour will revert to type. If Rachel Reeves is saying she won't borrow beyond certain parameters, she won't tax VAT, income tax, or national insurance, but they've got these huge spending pledges, including their Green Prosperity Plan, how on earth are they going to pay for it if they don't impose a wealth tax, which, let's be honest, the woman who wants to be the next Chancellor has massively flirted with in the past?
Well, I can just about remember the Labour government 50 years ago. I'm not sure it's the best thing to draw on at the present time. And the reality is the present government has imposed the highest level of taxation since the Second World War.
Sure.
So I don't think we need any lessons or any warnings from the Conservative Party about taxation at the moment.
The Institute for Fiscal Studies has examined all the manifestos. Labour claims theirs is fully costed, as has the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats, and indeed Reform. And Paul Johnson at the IFS basically says they're not worth the paper they're written on. They're not properly costed at all, and they're flimsy. And I include Labour in that. You know, they could be entering government on a supermajority on the basis, really, of a blank piece of paper which hasn't got much detail in it.
Well, as I say, I don't think there'll be any super majority, but and I've got a lot of respect for Paul Johnson. Actually, the IFS report also said that Labour's proposals in terms of regulation and in terms of planning changes were likely to speed growth, and that was the thing that was going to make the difference.
So you don't think that Labour will bring in more regulation and again revert to type? I mean, that's the problem, or at least the concern of small and medium-sized businesses, that they're going to be caught up in ever more red tape.
Well, no, I don't think that's any part of Labour's plans. What we want is to grow small businesses, micro businesses to small businesses to bigger businesses. That's the whole
But if
essence.
the minimum wage goes up to, say, as has been mooted by Angela Rayner and indeed hinted at by Rachel Reeves, to £15 an hour, let's just look at the hospitality sector, with pubs closing down rapidly by the week. Isn't that going to cripple a lot of small businesses that have had 6% shaved off their profit margins because of the rise in corporation tax? They've had a horrific COVID. How are some small businesses going to cope with that kind of wage increase? The living wage and the minimum wage has risen by a record amount just in recent years, and a lot of businesses are going to be really struggling to cope with that.
Well, obviously, I recall when the last Labour government introduced the minimum wage, and there were all sorts of dire warnings about what it was going to do. In fact, it helped the economy. I don't think there's any question that we're going to try and impose wage rises that are unrealistic. What we're looking for is a fair deal for people who are working and for people who are running businesses.
Stephen, the counter-argument to that is, OK, a fair deal for people, that's fine. If you put wages up too high, it's inflationary. And equally, if it closes businesses down, people lose their jobs anyway. Hold that thought, because I've got James Heapy in Paddington. He's the former Armed Services Minister. He's with us now. James Heapy, can I get your reaction to this latest development in the Tory betting scandal? We've got 5 more police officers now embroiled. It's a bit of a nightmare, this, for Rishi Sunak, isn't it?
Yeah. The whole thing sucks and just plays to the public's perception of politicians generally. I don't think they distinguish, sadly, because there's now a Labour guy that's involved in some sort of election betting thing as well. I think all it does is just creates that sort of weary sigh as people look at each other in the coffee queue in the morning, and does politics on the whole a massive disservice.
And James, I know you're not standing, so you're sort of running into the distance in a different way and doing something different with your life after committing a huge amount of your time, not just to the armed forces, by the way, but also to political life. Give us as objective a analysis of the Tory campaign and what you think the prospects are for Rishi Sunak come July the 4th.
Oh, look, there won't be a Conservative government elected next week. That is plain to see. And so I think that what people have got to consider is whether or not it is healthy for our democracy if Parliament were to become just irrelevant, which is what it would become if the majority was so vast. And, heck, there have been people on the left who are complaining that an 80-seat majority gave Boris Johnson untrammelled power. Well, they ain't seen nothing yet.
On that note, James Heapy, thank you very much indeed for joining me. I know you had a bit of a transport nightmare, so I'm very grateful to see your face in the Paddington studio.
My pleasure.
We'll be speaking again, I know, during this election campaign. Steve McCabe, thank you very much indeed for your contribution.